Hello there, Steve here. Welcome back to another Sleepy Steve story. I hope you are tucked in, comfortable, and warm. Go on, adjust your pillow if you need to, let your shoulders drop, and allow the day to slow down around you because there is absolutely no rush tonight, none at all. Before we drift off tonight, remember to subscribe to help Steve-O out, and I will keep making more sleepy stories to help you study gently, revise quietly, and settle your mind at the end of the day. We are continuing VCE Psychology, Unit 3, Area of Study 1. Tonight, we are looking closely at the tiny communication system that makes psychological functioning possible by exploring neurons, glial cells, neural transmission, synapses, neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, excitatory and inhibitory effects, and the quiet way the nervous system carries messages through the body and brain. You do not need to memorize every term right now. You do not need to write anything down. Just let the words drift gently into your mind, while Steve slowly lays them out, one idea at a time, like soft notes placed carefully on a page. Let us take a slow breath in together, right down into the belly, and let it go, slowly. Now imagine that we are sitting in the same calm study room as before, late in the evening, with a small lamp glowing on the desk, rain moving softly against the window, and a notebook open to a fresh page. At the top of the page, written in quiet handwriting, are the words, "Messages between neurons." In our last episode, we looked at the nervous system as a whole, with the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the somatic nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system all working together to help the body receive information, process information, and respond to the world. Tonight, we are moving a little smaller. We are zooming in, down from the whole body, down from the brain and spinal cord, down from branches of the nervous system, until we arrive at the basic functional unit of the nervous system, the neuron. A neuron is a specialized nerve cell that receives, processes, and transmits information. Neurons allow the nervous system to communicate, and because psychological functioning depends on communication within the brain and body, neurons sit at the center of how we think, feel, learn, remember, respond to stress, and experience the world around us. It can be useful to imagine a neuron as a tiny messenger, but not a messenger that walks slowly from place to place. A neuron is more like a living communication line, receiving information at one end, carrying an electrical message along its length, and then passing a chemical message across a tiny gap to the next cell. The process is delicate, precise, and continuous. Even as you rest quietly now, millions and millions of neural messages are moving through your nervous system, helping your body stay balanced, helping your breathing continue, helping your hearing notice the quiet sounds around you, and helping your mind understand the words you are listening to. Let your breathing remain slow, in and out. Now, let us look at the structure of a neuron. A typical neuron has several key parts. The dendrites are branch-like structures that receive messages from other neurons. They reach outward from the cell body, like the thin branches of a tree, ready to collect information arriving from nearby cells. The soma, or cell body, contains the nucleus and helps keep the neuron alive and functioning. It is the part of the neuron where information received from the dendrites can be integrated before the message continues. The axon is the long fiber that carries the neural message away from the soma. In many neurons, the axon is covered in sections by a myelin sheath, which is a fatty insulating layer that helps speed up transmission of the neural impulse. The myelin sheath does not cover the axon in one continuous piece. There are small gaps between sections of myelin, and these gaps help the electrical message move efficiently along the axon. At the end of the axon are the axon terminals, which allow the neuron to communicate with other neurons, muscles, or glands. So, if you follow the path slowly, the message is received by the dendrites, processed through the soma, carried along the axon, and passed on from the axon terminals. Dendrites receive. The soma supports and integrates. The axon carries. The myelin sheath speeds. The axon terminals pass the message on. Let that simple pattern rest in your mind for a moment. Receive, carry, pass on. Receive, carry, pass on. Quietly, calmly, again and again. Now, neurons do not work alone. They are supported by glial cells. Glial cells are not usually the stars of the story because students often hear more about neurons, synapses, and neurotransmitters, but glial cells are essential because they help support, nourish, protect, and maintain neurons. Some glial cells help form the myelin sheath around axons. Some help remove waste products. Some help support the environment surrounding neurons. Some contribute to repair and protection within the nervous system. So, while neurons carry the messages, glial cells help make sure the messaging system can keep working effectively. A calm way to remember this is to imagine neurons as the communication lines, and glial cells as the quiet support crew maintaining the lines, insulating them, protecting them, and helping the whole system continue. Let us breathe again, slowly in and slowly out. Now let us follow a neural message as it moves through a neuron. When a neuron is activated, an electrical impulse travels along the axon. This impulse is sometimes called an action potential. The action potential is an all-or-nothing event, which means that once the neuron reaches the threshold needed to fire, the neural impulse occurs fully, rather than halfway. It is not like a dimmer switch that can be turned up a little or down a little. It is more like a signal that either fires or does not fire. Once it fires, the impulse moves along the axon towards the axon terminals. The myelin sheath helps speed this process, allowing messages to travel more efficiently through the nervous system. This efficiency matters because many psychological and bodily responses depend on fast communication. If you touch something hot, if you hear your name called, if you catch a falling object, or if you notice a change in the environment, neural messages must move quickly and accurately. But the electrical message inside one neuron cannot simply leap into the next neuron as electricity. Between neurons, there is a tiny gap. This gap is called the synaptic gap or synaptic cleft. The whole junction between one neuron and another is called the synapse. And at the synapse, the nervous system changes the message from an electrical form into a chemical form. When the electrical impulse reaches the axon terminals, chemical messengers called neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic gap. These neurotransmitters move across the gap and bind to receptor sites on the dendrites of the next neuron. The receptor sites are specialized, and the neurotransmitter must fit the receptor in a particular way, much like a key fitting into a lock. If enough of the right neurotransmitters bind to the receptor sites, the next neuron may become more likely to fire, and the message can continue. This process is called synaptic transmission, so we can say it slowly. An electrical impulse travels along the axon. It reaches the axon terminals. Neurotransmitters are released. They cross the synaptic gap. They bind to receptor sites, and the next neuron may be influenced to fire. Electrical within the neuron. Chemical between neurons. Electrical, then chemical, then electrical again. The rain is still soft against the window. The lamp is still warm, and the notebook remains open on the desk. Now let us look at what neurotransmitters actually do. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that allow neurons to communicate across a synapse. They do not all have the same effect. Some neurotransmitters have excitatory effects, which means they make the next neuron more likely to fire. Others have inhibitory effects, which means they make the next neuron less likely to fire. This balance between excitation and inhibition is extremely important. If the nervous system only excited neurons and never inhibited them, activity could become uncontrolled and overwhelming. If the nervous system only inhibited neurons and never excited them, messages would not move properly and responses would not occur when needed. Psychological functioning depends on balance. Some messages need to be strengthened, some need to be softened, some need to continue, some need to stop. Excitatory effects press the message forward. Inhibitory effects reduce the chance of the next message firing. Both are necessary. Both help regulate the nervous system. A common example of an excitatory neurotransmitter is glutamate, which is heavily involved in neural activation and is important in learning and memory. A common example of an inhibitory neurotransmitter is GABA, which helps reduce neural activity and supports calming or regulating effects within the nervous system. For VCE psychology, the important idea is not simply to memorize one neurotransmitter after another, but to understand that neurotransmitters influence whether neural messages continue, and that their effects can be excitatory or inhibitory depending on the neurotransmitter, the receptor, and the system involved. Let that idea settle gently. Neurotransmitters carry chemical messages. Some increase the likelihood of firing. Some decrease the likelihood of firing. And the nervous system uses both to regulate behavior and mental processes. Now, after neurotransmitters bind to receptor sites, they do not just remain in the synapse forever. The synapse needs to be cleared so the signal can be controlled and future messages can occur properly. Neurotransmitters may be broken down by enzymes. They may be reabsorbed by the neuron that released them in a process called reuptake, or they may diffuse away from the synapse. This clearing process matters because chemical messages must be regulated. If neurotransmitters remained active for too long, they could continue influencing the next neuron beyond what is useful. If they were removed too quickly, the message might not have enough effect. Again, the nervous system depends on balance, activity and rest, excitation and inhibition, release and clearing, communication and regulation. Let us take another slow breath together, in and out. Now we can gently add another idea. Some chemical messengers are called neuromodulators. A neuromodulator is a chemical messenger that can influence the effects of neurotransmitters or change the way groups of neurons communicate over a wider area or a longer period of time. Where a neurotransmitter often has a more direct effect at a synapse, a neuromodulator can adjust, strengthen, weaken, or shape patterns of neural activity. This means neuromodulators can influence broader states such as arousal, mood, motivation, attention, and learning. It can be useful to imagine a neurotransmitter as a single message being passed from one neuron to the next, while a neuromodulator is more like adjusting the lighting in the whole room, changing the conditions under which many messages are received. Both are chemical messengers. Both matter, but they can work at different scales. A neurotransmitter sends or influences a specific signal. A neuromodulator changes how signals are experienced, strengthened, or regulated across wider patterns of nervous system activity. As you listen, you do not need to hold these definitions tightly. Just picture the quiet study room with the lamp dimming or brightening slightly, and the messages on the page becoming easier or harder to read depending on the conditions around them. That is the gentle idea of modulation. Now let us connect neural communication to psychological functioning. Every thought, feeling, movement, memory, perception, and response depends on communication within the nervous system. When you learn something new, patterns of neural communication are involved. When you experience stress, neural communication is involved. When you remember a familiar face, hear a sound, taste a flavor, feel fear, relax after tension, or choose to speak, neural communication is involved. This does not mean that psychology is only biology. Psychology still considers behavior and mental processes through many lenses, including biological, psychological, and social influences. But in Unit 3, understanding the biology of neural communication helps explain how experience can affect behavior and mental processes. Experience can shape patterns in the nervous system. Repeated activation of neural pathways can strengthen connections. Learning can involve changes in synaptic connections. Stress can alter patterns of arousal and regulation, and the nervous system can change over time through plasticity. This is why neurons and synapses are not just small details. They are the foundations of broader psychological processes. Now, let us make this exam useful, but still gentle. If a question asks about neuron structure, you want to remember the main parts and their roles. Dendrites receive information. The soma contains the nucleus and maintains the cell. The axon carries the neural impulse away from the soma. The myelin sheath insulates the axon and speeds transmission. The axon terminals release neurotransmitters to communicate with the next cell. If a question asks about synaptic transmission, you want to explain the sequence. The electrical impulse travels along the axon to the axon terminals. Neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic gap. They cross the gap and bind to receptor sites on the postsynaptic neuron, and this can influence whether the next neuron fires. If a question asks about excitatory and inhibitory effects, you want to remember that excitatory effects increase the likelihood that the next neuron will fire, while inhibitory effects decrease the likelihood that the next neuron will fire. If a question asks about neurotransmitters and neuromodulators, you want to remember that neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that transmit signals across synapses. while neuromodulators influence the effects of neurotransmitters and broader patterns of neural communication. Simple, slow, useful, one piece at a time. Now imagine drawing a small neuron in the notebook. Branches on one side for dendrites, a round soma, a long axon stretching across the page, small segments of myelin wrapped along the axon terminals reaching towards the next neuron, and between them a tiny synapse. The drawing does not need to be perfect. It only needs to remind you of the path. Receive, process, carry, transmit, then across the synapse, chemical messages crossing the gap, receptor sites waiting on the other side, the next neuron responding. This quiet process is repeated throughout the nervous system again and again in patterns too complex to see directly, but simple enough to understand in pieces. And now, as the room becomes quieter and the rain continues softly outside, we can begin to let the details rest. Neurons are specialized nerve cells. Glial cells support neuronal function. Dendrites receive messages. The soma maintains the cell. The axon carries the neural impulse. The myelin sheath speeds transmission. The axon terminals help pass the message on. The synapse is the junction between neurons. Neurotransmitters cross the synaptic gap. Excitatory effects make firing more likely. Inhibitory effects make firing less likely. Neuromodulators shape broader patterns of neural communication. And all of this supports psychological functioning, thinking, feeling, learning, remembering, responding, settling. Your work for tonight is done. You have moved from the whole nervous system into the tiny spaces between neurons, where messages are passed carefully, regulated gently, and repeated constantly beneath your awareness. You do not need to hold on to every term now. They are safely resting in your mind. Neurons, synapses, neurotransmitters, excitation, inhibition, modulation, communication. Let your breathing slow. Let the study room fade. Let the lamp grow softer. Let the rain become quieter, and allow your mind and body to settle into rest. This has been Sleepy Steve, helping you fall asleep and study. Good night.